Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. This, by the way, is not a podcast. This is a live video where I talk about podcasting. Topic of today's show is the BFR approach to podcasting. Last night, Mr. Elon Musk, creator, owner, founder, billionaire, playboy, whatever, of SpaceX, was on television, on my television. It was a YouTube Live to do a webcast, announcing the name of and more details of the first mission to the moon. And that was fascinating enough, the fact that billionaire born in South Africa taking a Japanese guy and a bunch of other hippies to the moon in 5 years is kind of fascinating. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about how they're going to get there, the BFR, the big rocket. That's what BFR stands for, exactly what you think it would, BFR. And what it has to do with podcasting. Now, you don't have to be a fan of SpaceX or engineering or even get any of this to see what I'm talking about. But the BFR is a massive departure from the way that we humans think about spacecraft. I would imagine most of you listening right now don't think about spacecraft. Some do. But in the video, it was very clear, and Elon went to some great length to talk about the challenges that they had to overcome and their approach to making the BFR being quite different than the rest. And I think it has some parallels for podcasting. So I'm going to explain it along the way because I think that's really the only way to do this. He showed a video, a fake video, obviously, not a fake video, but an animation of how this creature, this big belly flopping creature, which is what it does, would return to Earth, and it's amazing. And he said in there, look, you have to kind of throw away the assumptions of what this is not. I believe his words were, this is not something that makes intuitive sense when you see this animation, and it's weird. I mean, this thing comes in belly flopping all the way until it flips over magically, and like, why doesn't it fall? Lots of questions. But again, we're assured that it actually works and functions. So I think there's some lessons that we learn in podcasting, and I just want to talk about those today. So to make this BFR, they've got weird thing, man. There are wings on the back that one wing on the back that doesn't do anything, just there for a leg. Two more wings that have actuators on them, which means they move and they flex, not like a plane in flight, but actually with pistons and driving and move the entire wing shape, not just flaps. As it's coming back in from orbital velocity, none of this makes any sense. But anyhow, I digress. There is a lesson for podcasting. I promise you there's a lesson for podcasting from the BFR. You kind of got to watch the video of the BFR to see how crazy insane it is. But you don't have to watch the video for me to get these points across. Stop talking about BFR and start talking about podcasting Evo. Got it. Here we go. Number one, if you want to take the BFR approach to podcasting, that means you're going to do something radically different. The thing you want to do doesn't have precedence. We don't have... You're doing something that the rest haven't done before, and you're trying to do things not just in a different way, but something that is completely and totally different. So that's where you have to start. If your goal is just to make another podcast like every other podcast, don't take the BFR approach. But if you really want to do something different, maybe the BFR approach is right to you. Here's 4 fundamentals that I pulled from Elon's talk yesterday that I think help you figure that out. Number 1 is assume nothing. I mean, assume absolutely nothing. Conventional wisdom in podcasting is, let's go get lots of data on what works. Let's go poll our customers or poll the customers out there and find out what they're listening to, and let's build a podcast like the popular podcasts. That's great. That's not what the BFR approach says. The BFR approach says step 1 is assume nothing. Throw everything historical out the window. Throw any assumption we have out the window, so that we have our brains ready to have some pretty wild ideas. Number 1, throw everything out the window. Step 2 for the BFR approach to podcasting is form the right questions about the problem you're trying to solve. Elon talked about this. They didn't have the right questions to ask. They didn't know how to frame the problems they were dealing with in such a way to where a solution presented them. So they spent all of their time, or a lot of their time, in the development stage of the BFR, figuring out what questions to ask. Like, this is going to sound strange, but will the engines need to work in both a vacuum and at sea level? Okay, great. These are questions that they had to go through, and these have been asked, because the engine has to do both. When it returns and it goes back in, it's tough. Now, of course, we're not talking about crazy engineering problems in podcasting, but still, you need to ask the right questions. And have no assumptions. These two go hand in hand. With the right sort of questions, you can figure out what your podcast is trying to do. If you want to have 100,000 listeners, why do you want that? Is that really the right question? Is that really what we're trying to do? Or are we trying to move something that has a true business metric? And if so, is that the right business metric? More customers is great, but how do we get there? What are all the little steps that you have to do to get there? It's not just putting a big thing on the wall that says, we want to go to the moon in 10 years. It is all of the little steps. That's great for the vision. That's great for the idea. But all those little questions along the way on whatever your big, audacious goal is. Number 3, once you've got the right questions, according to Elon, things just kind of fell into place. The answers presented themselves once you had the questions asked properly. You've assumed nothing. You've asked the right sorts of questions. Then the answers present themselves to you. And then all you really have to do is, in his case, focus on the physics. Because the physics of this are really, really weird. But nonetheless, it's physics. Physics doesn't change, right? Yeah, you're going to belly flop through the atmosphere, but physics says you can do that. In fact, it says you should do this. Same thing for podcasting. Focus on your fundamentals. Again, throw out all the assumptions. What are the fundamentals that you need to put in place? All the things you have to get right from the beginning. You can't get rid of this. You have to do the fundamentals properly. And that's the technical aspects of what it means to create an audio file. That means how do we really work with the RSS feed itself. But again, throw out your assumptions, throw out and ask the right sorts of questions, focusing on the things you can control and the bits and pieces that are there. Answers present themselves. How you utilize those. And then the last bit of that, after he's thrown out all the assumptions, and you should throw out your assumptions if you're a podcast, make sure you're asking the right questions that will then lead themselves to the right answers. And the third thing is focusing on all the fundamentals, getting the basics right, and not worrying about anything else besides basics till you get them right. The fourth thing to do is build it right. Don't skimp on things. Quite often, especially in business podcasts, and I work with a lot of business podcasts, the parameters are set. This person has 4 hours a week to work on this show, and they can utilize this person for 20 minutes every other month, and that's it. That's the box we draw. Fill it for that one. That's not how they did the BFR. The BFR didn't work with a big, with having a budget set ahead of time. Elon's not even sure how much it's going to cost. He says on the order of $5 million. On the order of $5 billion. On the order of. It could be 4. It could be 15. We don't know what the number is. And the reason they don't know is they know they've got to build it right. They've got to build it right from scratch. They can't use equipment. They use materials, obviously, but they're not reusable parts. They've got to build everything from scratch, and they're not skimping on anything. They're going to build it right with the right kind of budget. And they're doing that because they've assumed nothing, they formed the right questions, they focused on the fundamentals, and now they're building it right. And here's the kicker. We still don't know if it will work. Same for your podcast. But that's the BFR approach to podcasting. I would love to talk more about this with you and how your new podcast could break new ground to do something really revolutionary, really, really radical, or even not. If it's more constrained, fine. I can talk with you about that too. My job is launching podcasts. I help firms make the kind of content that lead to actionable business goals. If that sounds fun to you, email me, evo@podcastlaunch.pro. Let's talk. Go to the website, podcastlaunch.pro. Take a look at the services that are listed there. I'll be back tomorrow with yet another podcast, Pontifications. Cheers.